Conrad, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet you today. A long period of the works happened, you moved in. You faced a lot of interesting moments in life during the project, and will be a very good opportunity maybe for some other homeowners to learn from your experience. At the very beginning, when the clients they need to choose whom to build the house, how they should start choosing from the value and the pricing.
Yeah, obviously the value trade-off is really important. I think it's good to get it. It is important to get it right. For many reasons and financial. It is important in some considerations. It's worth bearing in mind is time. And for some people, it's obviously critical to get stuff done as soon as possible. For us, I think we thought, as we sort of went into the project, we thought we had a bit more room to play with time because of our personal situation. So we therefore felt we could do some compromises in other areas that we knew had a risk of extending the project, but would allow us to save money elsewhere and therefore allow us to get better value in that sense. And so that was the trade-off that made sort of our project a little bit different from maybe how most people start, where it's just purely how can we get it done as quickly as possible? Because that wasn't necessarily the most important thing for us in order to get the value out of it. But that was the initial assumption that we started out with.
You had to make different decisions because you've been on the building for quite a longer time than expected, and you had a little bit of frustration, and then you had to change. So what is the best timing when you are in such process? What is the best time to stop and rethink and do the change as you've done?
Yeah, so I think that obviously there's no hard right or wrong answer, but I think our experience through it was initially, so there were some project extensions and delays as we had some scope creep. Obviously, as the project started, we uncovered things that we didn't know about. Conditions of building was worse than we thought. So some delays therefore came in, and you should obviously always need to make sure you allow for a buffer for that. Like no project is ever going to have the unknowns and you never know what's going to come up. So I think it's important to make sure you have that buffer built in. I think in our situation, maybe what sort of tripped us up a bit was with that buffer just kept extending and figuring out at what point is this no longer a reasonable project extension and a reasonable thing to have off the back of delays, and where does it become like this project is never going to end because there's just another thing and another thing and another thing. And so that's where it's a difficult decision of when to draw the line. And I think also changing teams halfway through a project is also very complicated because you never quite know what was been done, what's not been done. The handover is by definition in some ways is not going to be the super smoothest. So it is a complex thing to do. But I think it is something that is in hindsight one needs to make that decision more concretely and specifically and to move on to the extent you can, because delaying it obviously doesn't help either.
A very interesting point. So now if you'll do another project, will a transparent system with the daily reports with information that what's happening on a daily basis will be a breaking point for you, will be a must that will have to be offered by the builder?
Yeah, I think key is having good transparency and communication with both from an overall project perspective as well as sort of on the ground detail week by week. So having clear high level milestones of what things are going to be done at which point, and making sure that both sides, I think, are aware of that and committed to delivering against that, both obviously from the client perspective in terms of materials or finances or whatever, and from the contractor side in terms of obviously delivering on execution. And that's important, really important to be transparent and clear on that upfront and regularly reviewing that status. And then also just tactically, week by week, being clear with the guys on the ground, exactly have they understood the ins and outs, the nuances, the subtleties, and in some cases, the design decisions or the way things were done were often thought through very specifically, and so doing them in a slightly different way can have much bigger consequences than somebody just doing it on the ground necessarily thinks about. So making sure people who are actually working on the project hands-on understand the rationale and how things were and why things are being done the way they are. Keeping a close eye on both levels of the tactical week by week as well as the bigger picture, how are we overall progressing, I think is really important. I think it's also important to keep those two things separate and distinct so that they don't get blurred, because sometimes you can get lost in the weeds or you can just think about the big picture and forget about the details. So I think it's important to make sure you're keeping track of both levels, the tactical and the strategic.
Very good point. So a good weekly basis review of all the project then make a difference and a change. But would you be able to give an advice maybe for the homeowners, the people that they want to do a project at the very beginning when they are in between the process of choosing what is the best price and the value they can get? What will you advise the homeowner? What will be the red flags they have to pay attention mentioned at the very beginning, because the decision they have to make now is the most important decision they will do, because the rest of the project is a operational part where you have to be on site meetings, but the decision of making and choosing who is the right one is the most important. So what is going to be the tip and the red flags you'll to pay attention more when you do this decision?
Yeah, so I think a few things. Yeah, firstly, I think recommendations are obviously key in experience, and both from a client perspective, but I think also experience working with architects or also other project managers or other people who've interacted with the company, because your architect is often your sort of right-hand man in representing the client in terms of ensuring you deliver things. So ensuring it's or getting recommendations and making sure you get someone that the architect has a good vibe of and feel for helps. And just they've obviously got lots of experience of working with lots of different companies, so I think it's important to leverage them in terms of identifying those red flags. So that's a key one. I think a second one is around like the team itself and making sure you understand exactly who's in it and confirming that team really exists. One of the challenges we had was that we were told there was a lot of team and there were people, but it turned out a lot of these people were changing. It wasn't really stable, and so there wasn't really a team. So when there were challenges, there weren't any people, and we ended up with a lot of problems. So ensuring that you're dealing with a company that has a stable base. Obviously, there'll be people that change around that, but having a core stable base that you know will exist, I think, is really important. And validating that is key up front.
Yeah, very, very good points. And but when you look at the prices, because normally every single homeowner will get 4 or 5 quotes, and there's always a temptation of choosing the lowest quote. So in your opinion, what would be the most important advice you can give to homeowners? Because not everyone understands what is the scope of works, what are the prices, and how to choose the best price and the value, because it's not just the price, it's the value they will get for the entire process of the building.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. How do you get the right balance? Yeah, my philosophy in life is don't ever go for the cheapest quote. Ignore that one straight away. But you can evaluate the second cheapest or the third cheapest, but that isn't necessarily everything. I think the big concerns would be making sure that the people you're consulting with have really spent enough time to actually come up with the right decision. I think so. One of the red flags, if someone comes in and has a quick walk around and then gives you a number, that suggests they probably haven't scoped it out. So making sure you're working with someone who really has spent significant amount of time going through the plans, has asked very specific, detailed questions to ensure that, and that will obviously helps you make sure they understand the scope, but means that you've got comfort that they understand what they're doing in the scope, and the quote will ultimately be accurate. Because it's not a pleasant situation for anyone to be in when there's a misunderstanding, and partway through the project it turns out the builder thought one thing and the homeowner thought a different thing, and then we have to try and reconcile that, and being midway through a project to answer that is not a pleasant place to be for anyone. Exactly. And adds complexity, time, budget, or compromises, so it's something you want to avoid. So yeah, I think the big thing is making sure you are very clear on scope early on, everything is considered, and also thinking through, I think, some of the contingencies and understanding what would be representative, or how would you go about scoping or pricing if there were unknowns that came up.
During the project, is inevitable that there are variations. So in your opinion, what would be the best advice you can give to the homeowners on how to approach those variations?
You need to trade off between exactly the cost, getting what you want, compromising on that, the time that it would add, and potentially knock-on effects on other part of the build. So if you do something in one place, that could potentially have a knock-on effect somewhere else in terms of plumbing or electrics or anything else. So variations are definitely, I think, a challenging aspect. We tried as much as possible to really think through everything from the beginning to try and minimize that, and that was sort of our objective. And we tried to apply rigor to ourselves as well to not impose variations, even if we weren't necessarily convinced by something, unless we really felt strongly because of the complexity that it adds. So that was a really a key thing. There's some variations that are obviously within a client control, like if you decide to move a bathroom from here to there or a layout. There's other things that are typically more structural, where you don't necessarily have a choice about these things. Like it turns out the fabric of the building isn't what you expected, or major electric works are needed, or underpinning is required where you didn't think it was. And those kind of variations obviously also are tricky, and you just need to take the rough with the smooth on those. And make sure you're coordinating in your strategic reviews with the build team and the architect, making sure we're getting ahead of those, working with building control and others to get get ahead of those things.
Good decision. You've been very good during the entire process on the procurement side. You've been able to manage the procurements on time, deliver on time, and even push the builders to give you answers straight away when it was needed. So what is going to be your advice for the homeowners, how they have to approach on the procurement side? Because this can be the process that can delay the project.
I tried to really, through the plans and with the architect, initially really immerse myself into the build and the project and what it's going to look like. And for some people that's trickier than others, but immersing yourself and really seeing yourself in the space and then working with the architect to not just come up with the shape of the building, but we actually also work with the architect to come up with the proposed sort of interior design layout and work with the architect to actually get a proposed list of fixtures, fittings, and all of that. So that gave us a really solid baseline. So as part of the architect's scope of work, it wasn't just the plans for the builders and the structural engineer things. It was also a full list of fixtures and fittings, which gave us a great baseline. Now, obviously, some of those things we chopped and changed, or we decided to go for a cheaper variant that looked similar, or a couple of things we altered down the line. But having that baseline meant that we at least removed a lot of the basic decisions, and we could focus on the real things that mattered to us. Some of the simpler things, like which light fittings to go in the basement, like it really doesn't matter as long as there's a light fitting. And this way, someone already gave us trusted and reliable option that we knew that was it, and we could then just order. And so then keeping track of that, and then making sure we're and working with the project team, when do we deliver what, at what point, and what do we order, meant that we could try and make sure that everything was smooth from an execution perspective. So being clear upfront on what you want to deliver. That process also helped with minimizing variations, because as you really immerse yourself in the space and you think about the fixtures and fittings, you really start to think about how you're using the space, and then some of the little details like the orientation of the bathroom, where the sink needs to be, when you start thinking through, well, where's the towel rail going to go? Like, these are small petty things, but actually if you get them wrong, you end up having a major cost of having to move a toilet, which is small. If you think ahead and you plan these things out and you think about how the fixtures and fittings are going to work, it really forces you to think through how you're really going to use the space, and therefore is the space laid out optimally, and therefore minimize the risk of having to do variations later.
And some of the products, when you buy, often is necessary for you to ask the builder confirmation of the sizes of the product, so you can get the orders upfront. What would be your advice?
So I think the key thing is initially to send the full list of things you're intending to buy to the builder, so they've got a broader awareness of what's going to be coming, and they can plan to receive that, and also question in case there's any issues that they may spot, particularly as it relates to things like volumes and amounts of things, cornicing or flooring or tiling. We've got the plans, but it's always good to get that confirmed with the builder as they're executing. Make sure they've considered any things like, does your design mean that there's going to be a higher than expected level of wastage on tiles, for example, based on the design and the layout of the tiles? And those are some of the things that are best left for the person who's actually going to be executing to opine on. So I think sharing that full list of scope of what you're intending to buy early on is important. And then also being clear and transparent with the builder, which things that you definitely think you want the builder's input on early, and again structuring that into the conversation so that you agree as part of your plan when you're going to review that, and give the builder time to prepare responses, because there's obviously many of these things aren't a simple yes or no question or a size question. They will need research and investigation and decisions by the project team as well.
So is basically the client is better to be proactive and push a little bit on the boundary and ask for the answers upfront, rather than wait to be told what to do and where to order.
Yeah, that's what I found has sort of worked better for me, and having a strong opinion in terms of how I want the end result to be. I found that more effective. I think that also means it does help help push the project along. And even with the people working on the ground, if they know a thing is arriving tomorrow, well, they need to get stuff ready for that thing to be there tomorrow. I think it works on human nature at every level. So having those things helps. I think also some things have a lead time, and so it's also being very important to be aware of what the lead time of some of these things are, and you don't end up, and the builders also sometimes don't know that some of the thing they want happens to be out of stock, or that yes, it's available, but it's available for half the price somewhere else if you wait another week. So making sure you plan this up ahead can help you make the right decisions and ultimately get the best value and planning.
And another one which was really good in what you were doing, and we did appreciate it a lot, is the way preparing a proper list for the snagging with an Excel file with pictures, with descriptions, and keep track on that, because you've done actually a pretty good management job on that side. So
Yeah, well, I guess I deal with sort of projects and executing projects at work and technology and various other things. So used to the idea of there being issues post go live of a project, and effectively this is the same thing. It's go live of the house, we move in, and there's things. And one of the things that certainly I've worked with my clients in my professional life is making sure we understand like what were the expectations of what was delivered, where is that not meeting, where are there issues, and where there are issues, making sure we break them down and categorize them so that the people dealing with the teams, they can be sent to the right teams internally, and making sure we document like what the actual issue is and describing it in a way that someone who's picking up the document for the first time with no context should be able to understand what the problem is. And so basically translated that to the project here. And yeah, we thought, okay, let's go through systematically, top to bottom, categorize things. What's the nature of the issue, tracking a picture or pictures and description of the problem, and keeping track of what the next steps are of those things, because those next steps could be, in some cases, ordering a new piece, or could be following up with on a warranty of a particular item specifically, or it could be a case of the project team coming back to resolve. And other things just need to be monitored after they've been resolved once, cracks or some other issue that could come back, aren't necessarily guaranteed to return. So making sure we track that through a sheet and through a sort of more formal process helps us keep an eye on those things. And I think it's also fairer for the build team as well. There's more transparency, I think, in both sides, and it's very clear what the scope is. And we were also very conscious we're moving in with young kids, and there'll be things that they will break, and wouldn't be fair to throw that on the snagging list. So it helps keep us honest as well in terms of the things that we're raising, genuinely associated with as a result of snagging and issues to solve that way, as opposed to just natural wear and tear that is unreasonable to expect the build team to address.
But would you be able to explain from your point of view what snagging means? Because we face sometimes not everyone understand what is the process, what is snagging, how you're making the list. What is your point of view on that?
Yeah, so I think snagging is, from my perspective and the way I've sort of thought about it, it's all the little follow-ups of things that when you actually move in, you didn't necessarily notice when you did the initial handover, or that degrade unexpectedly quickly through time that you weren't necessarily expecting. And some of those things, as I say, may have been visible when you initially did the project completion handover, but a lot of times they aren't. They're things that that develop slower than during build, but much faster than you would expect reasonably through wear and tear. So I think some of the examples we had here, there was a couple of places where silicone wasn't completely applied in certain areas, and that we just missed when we did the walkthrough of the house. So we spotted those later cleaning. So those are the kind of things that got added. Or there were other things that silicone was coming away in certain areas, or slight movement in the house resulted in some cracks that are natural as the house settles down, but are associated with the build work that was done. And so are the kind of things that make sense for the build team to come back and just tidy up and fix up after a couple of months. Because again, some of these things, if you do the snagging too quickly and you sign off on it too quickly, you're not going to see some of these things that maybe take a little bit longer to develop. But obviously at some point, once you got past the sort of 6-7 month time, you're into the more normal wear and tear. So it's about hitting that sweet spot of between 3 and 6 months to make sure, in my view, to make sure you kind of address things that are fair and reasonable as a result of.
So basically, since you're moving in, you start creating a list and putting everything you're observing in one single list, and then you're handing over to a builder. Then that will be a good process, yeah. So
exactly.
Then the builder is happy having a full clear list, and you're happy that things you can check that has been done or not. So.
Exactly, and by dividing and categorizing it, it helps the builder because he knows, well, which of these three things are going to send my plumber in for, who am I going to send my electrician in for, who am I going to send my painter decorator in for, and they can plan that way as well, and also give us feedback and say, this chap is coming and he's going to close items 4, 7, and 10 on your list. So I'm very clear on expectations. I know who's coming. I know what they're going to do. And then once they're done, I can just check off those 3 things and say, yep, I agree they've done it or not done it or whatever the case may be. And that just allows for much more clear tracking and expectations management.
Amazing. And when you started feeling like home?
It takes a little bit of time initially, and there's obviously a few follow-ups that very rarely do you move into a fully finished house that's ready to go. There's always a few things that are still coming, sofas that are missing, and fixtures and furnishings as well that come in. So it is a process of settling in. It took a couple of months to really feel like we were in. Cardboard boxes gone, shelves up, those kind of things really make you feel like you're in, having sort of plants and just the little things that build up through time as they start to appear, and it's a less a functional space and more a lived-in space. that's when you really start to feel like home.
Amazing. Thank you very much for all the answers. And what will be one single advice you'll be able to give, which will be the most important out of all of them? Do you have anything in your mind?
The one tip, I think it's really important to have a really clear idea of what you want to have. And you may not know that at the beginning, obviously, and use your architect to get to that point. But I think it's really important to be very clear on what you want your end outcome to be. And that's across a combination of how long from a timing, what the budget should be, but also very importantly, how you're actually going to live in that space and seeing yourself there and making sure that everything you're doing is geared towards that goal, and you align everyone, your project manager, your builder, the architect to executing towards that vision. If you don't have that vision, you end up delaying decisions, things don't get ordered, you end up with variations, lots of other things can creep into the project.
For sure, you love all your house, but is in the house one place which you are the most proud of?
Tricky. I think mostly this space here, the way we've sort of done the extension downstairs, gone out sideways and out slightly into the garden, has really sort of transformed the space. We also made it slightly lower, so it is higher than a typical house like here in this kind of area. These kind of buildings are quite constrained in terms of what you can do, so it's about maximizing the space. We were also fortunate to have a west-facing garden, so this side is actually north-facing, so that meant that it actually made sense to put in a big massive skylight and let in a lot of light, which if it was south-facing potentially would have been an issue with heat and heat control in the summer. So we were fortunate actually with this angle that basically never really gets direct sun, but lets in a huge amount of natural light into what otherwise would be a very dark space. And a lot of other houses around here, if you go around these typical Victorian terrace houses, the kitchen at the back can be a very damp, dark, low, unpleasant place to be, really. Whereas this way, it's really opened up.
The decision of taking the builder is one of the most important because that can change the life of the homeowner during the entire process.
Yeah.
Either it's going to be a smooth process, a nice one, enjoyable, or it's going to be a stressful one. Because you faced a decision which you had to do both. You had the stress and at the same time you chosen a builder that finished and completed your project. So what was your inner feelings and what was the process of taking this decision?
Yeah, it's difficult because there's lots of things you're trying to weigh up, and obviously budget is really important and the other constraints that you have. So obviously making sure you've got it needs to be a team you're going to work with, and you've got to have a good feeling with the person you're working with, and obviously that's first and foremost. But there are other things, and if there's compromises you need to make, like for example, you want to go for a cheaper option, it is really, and if there are red flags or other concerns that you've got, it's really important to make sure you're aware of them, and that even if you do go ahead with one of those, you need to think sort of risk-adjusted perspective, like what that is and what the options would be. So don't just assume you go the cheapest option and that's going to be it. If there are compromises you're making, like you're going to go for a builder that gives you a cheaper quote, but there are some red flags or there's some concerns, you need to make sure you really think through the implications of that earlier on, because they may well come to fruition. We had that in our project when we started off the project. We went for a cheaper quote and a builder. We were trading off against time, and we thought we don't mind him taking a bit longer with a smaller team because it'll save us budget. But we had that nagging feeling, maybe this won't quite work. But when we made that decision, we were very open with ourselves that there is that risk that we're facing. And so when it got to the point where this wasn't tenable and that risk was starting to realize, that made that decision a lot easier to make, because we were aware this was a scenario that could happen, and we were prepared for it, both sort of financially and from a timing and emotionally. So when the time came to cut and change our approach, we were more ready to do that in a more effective and meaningful way.
So this awareness and being honest to yourself that you're taking a decision and a risk is actually a point of change, because that one will change the way you're going to feel when things goes wrong, either on your emotions during the process or when you need to take a decision to the end.
Exactly. If you're going for if you're budget constrained and you're going for the cheapest option because that's the only option that you have from a budget perspective, you need to bear in mind that may not work out. And if that doesn't work out and you don't have the budget to cover that shortfall, you're then stuck and you have a big problem. Whereas in our approach, it was important for us to get value, but we had reserves in case things didn't work. And we wanted to throw the dice and thought we'd try out a cheaper option. It didn't work, but we had the ability to step in and do something about that. Whereas if you don't have that reserve, if you don't go into it with a risk-adjusted mindset and bear in mind like the risks that you're taking, then you can end up with a real problem. As I say, we were fortunate enough to be able to do something about it because we were aware of that right from the beginning. If we had not been aware of that risk and hadn't factored that into our planning, we wouldn't have necessarily been able to make a different decision, and we could have been stuck for much longer in terms of delivering that project.
Actually, even for myself, you've been giving me the best advice now, that being honest and aware of the risk I'm taking at the very beginning is actually the most important thing that I have to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And you can take a risk, and sometimes you get lucky with that risk, but you need to really be aware of it being a risk. So you may get lucky if you choose a cheaper builder, and it may work out, and that's great. That's winning. You threw the dice and you lucked out, but you may not, and you need to be prepared for if you don't win. And if you're not prepared for if you don't win on rolling that dice, then that's when you get into trouble.
A risky decision. So how you operate, because I know in life everything else is just actions, but the actions bring a result, but the decision is the most important. You take the right decision, then you do the right actions, and then you have the right result. A decision is about logic, is about the emotions you're feeling and about the inner feeling, that intuition. Will you be able to advise and tell me how you operate?
How to get the best decision? Yeah. You got to look through what are all the options, pros and cons of each. And
so you think it's good to write it down, or just
I think writing it down is super helpful, because it forces you to think through everything. If you just think about it, you can get some of it, but actually writing it down, and option A, option B, option C, pros and cons, you actually think it through, and then what happens if plan A doesn't work, like what would the follow on be? So writing it down gives you a framework to evaluate that, stress test it, think about like what could happen in an extreme scenario.
What about the emotions? Do you have to feel and listen to your emotions?
Emotions, it's tricky. I think you need to be able to turn it on and off. I think sometimes it is important to listen to your emotions and your gut feeling on things, and particularly as it relates to like human interaction, and like, do you feel like you can get on with someone? Like, that's an emotional thing. Like, do you trust that person? Do you think you can build a good relationship with them for a big project? So that piece is definitely emotional. But equally, sometimes you need to take a step back and just look at hard facts. So when we were dealing with the previous guy, we felt we could work with him, like we were working well, but like it just wasn't delivering. So we needed to cut out the emotion and ignore the fact that he was a nice guy, and he'd always have a coffee with us, and look at the facts of but he's having a coffee with us and not building, and like there's no team here, and like we're not getting anywhere. So like that's when you need to cut emotion. So I think you need to be able to turn your emotions on and off.
So I've seen that you had a very open intuition and you listen to it. Will you be able to advise how to listen? It's just
tricky,
natural.
Natural, yeah. There's always trade-offs in life out there, and everyone sort of deals with it in different ways. Professionally, as I say, I do a lot of projects and implementing things, and we implement systems and help clients. So experience of this, like helping clients make decisions on things and executing stuff and making change and then delivering projects and seeing the outcome. Like that experience helps you with that, and it's a bit of a dry run, and obviously it's closer to home, literally, when it's your own house as opposed to a work project. But so it is different, but a lot of the stuff, a lot of it does translate.
Thank you very much, Konrad, for your timing and being with us here and giving all the tips to the homeowners.
Thank you very much. Thank you.